The distress signal from the Velari wasn't like any that had come before it. It was frantic, broken, filled with static, and yet unmistakable in its desperation. Admiral Lena Rowe sat at the heart of Earth's command center, her eyes fixed on the flickering message. Despite the archaic technology used by the Velari, the meaning was clear. "Help us," the message begged, repeating the same line over and over. "The Karniks are coming. They are too strong. We are lost." For years, humanity had been part of the galactic community, trading, observing, sometimes fighting, but never fully involved. The galaxy's more established races had treated them like a fringe species, young, unpredictable, not quite ready for the big leagues. But Earth had always been underestimated. And now, in their moment of desperation, the Velari needed a force that wouldn't just fight back, but one that would crush the threat entirely. Rowe knew what had to be done. She turned toward Lieutenant Colonel Isaac Thorne, who was standing nearby, waiting for orders. His face was already set in determination. "Get the 5th Expeditionary Fleet ready for launch. We're not waiting for approval from the Council. We move immediately." "But, Mom," Thorne hesitated, glancing at the star maps of Velari Prime. "The Karniks are known to be—" "I know what they are." Rowe cut him off, her voice cold. "The galaxy has underestimated us for too long. It's time we show them who we are." With a swift motion, Rowe slammed her fist on the table, and the room erupted into action. Officers scrambled to their stations, activating the Soul Defense Network, coordinating with fleets, and preparing weapons that had been designed for every contingency, except one. No one had anticipated this level of brutality from the Karniks. As the fleet moved toward Velari Prime, Rowe stared out at the vast expanse of stars, her mind racing. The Karniks were vicious, warriors without mercy, whose reputation alone sent ripples of fear across the galaxy. But Rowe wasn't afraid. The Velari were peaceful, vulnerable, and if Earth didn't intervene, they would be annihilated. But Earth's fleet was not the same as the other galactic forces. While the galaxy's older empires were diplomats, Earth was a firebrand, raw, unpolished, and willing to do whatever it took. It wasn't just about saving the Velari. It was about showing the galaxy that humanity was a force to be reckoned with. The massive ESV Resolute, Earth's flagship, broke through the atmosphere with the force of a comet, its engines blazing as it cut through the stars. In its wake, the rest of the fleet followed. Sleek destroyers, carrier ships, and smaller support vessels, all ready to bring retribution. Admiral Rowe stood at the helm of the Resolute, watching the formation of ships through the viewport, her voice low but commanding. "Get me a secure line to Velari Command. It's time we made our entrance." Moments later, the comms officer's voice crackled. "Secure channel to Velari. Admiral, they're waiting for your transmission." Rowe straightened. The Velari needed her, but it wasn't just about them. This was humanity's moment. A moment to prove that Earth would not let the galaxy's horrors unfold unchecked. "Velari Command," she began, her voice carrying across the stars. "This is Earth. We've received your call. Help is on the way." On Velari Prime, the situation was grim. The once beautiful cities, built with harmony and elegance, were now smoldering ruins. The majestic spires of Velari architecture had crumbled under the relentless assault of the Karniks' horde. The air, once filled with the sounds of peaceful melodies and artistic celebration, now only carried the heavy silence of impending extinction. Captain Lyra Fennel crouched in the shattered remains of a Velari cathedral, its ornate columns reduced to rubble. Her once pristine uniform was stained with the dust and blood of her fallen comrades. Beside her, a young Velari soldier, barely out of training, clutched his pulse rifle, his eyes wide with fear. "We can't hold them much longer, Captain," the soldier said, his voice cracking. "The Karniks are everywhere. They're unstoppable." Lyra's gaze hardened. Her people were scholars, artists, diplomats, not soldiers. They had never prepared for this kind of brutality. The Karniks, A barbaric race of warlords and conquerors had appeared without warning, overwhelming their defenses with sheer force and bloodlust. It wasn't just a war, it was an extinction event. The Karniks didn't just want victory, they sought annihilation. Lyra turned to look at the panoramic view of the horizon, where plumes of smoke rose from what used to be their capital city. The ground shook as the enemy's warships hovered overhead, their shadow casting an unnatural gloom over the planet. Below them, troops of Karniks raiders moved through the streets, looting and slaughtering with brutal efficiency. "We are alone," Lyra muttered under her breath, the weight of the situation settling on her shoulders. The Velari had sent their distress signal days ago, but there had been no response. It seemed that every neighboring race in the galaxy had their own problems to deal with. The Velari were too small, too weak to draw significant attention. As the ground trembled beneath her, Lyra's communicator beeped urgently. Her fingers shook as she activated it, bringing up a grainy, static-filled image of Ambassador Thedler, the head of their diplomatic council. His face was haggard, his eyes haunted by the reality of their impending doom. "Captain Fennel, it's the last transmission," Thaler said, his voice tight with despair. "We've tried every channel. We've reached out to every ally, but no one is coming. The Karniks have already begun their final assault. We are out of time." Lyra's breath caught in her throat. The Velari were known for their peaceful ways, but they had always believed that in times of crisis, the galaxy would come together. That belief was now shattered. They had no more allies to rely on. They had no more time. She closed her eyes for a moment, the weight of her people's fate pressing down on her chest. Then, with a sudden flare of determination, she clenched her fist. "I won't let them die without a fight," she declared, her voice ringing with defiance. As she stood, she activated the communications panel again, broadcasting across the planet. "This is Captain Lyra Fennel of Velari Prime. If anyone is listening, we will not surrender. We will never surrender." Just as she finished her transmission, a new signal flickered through the static. It was faint, a crackling hum that made her heart race. The voice that followed was unmistakable. "Velari Command," the voice said, firm and unwavering. "This is Earth. We've received your call. Help is on the way." Lyra's knees nearly gave way. For the first time since the carnage began, a glimmer of hope pierced the darkness. As the final words of the transmission echoed in Lyra Fennel's ears, her breath caught in her throat. For a moment, she thought the static had overwhelmed her hearing. Had she heard that correctly? Was Earth, the young, barely considered significant species, actually answering their call? "Help is on the way." The words had a weight to them, carrying the promise of something unimaginable. Lyra stood frozen for a heartbeat, the harsh sounds of the ongoing battle outside the shattered cathedral walls filling her ears. But something within her stirred, a flicker of hope. She could scarcely believe it. The Velari had always been the ones to extend a hand of peace. Now, they were the ones grasping at the edge of survival. But it seemed the humans, Earth, had come to their aid when no one else would. Without another word, Lyra slammed her fist against the panel, cutting off the transmission. She quickly adjusted her comm system to send an emergency signal to the Velari's last stronghold deep in the underground tunnels. "Prepare for immediate evacuation," she ordered, her voice steady, though her mind was spinning. "Prepare to move to the secondary defense positions." She gave the order, but her heart was elsewhere, racing ahead toward the possibility that Earth could change the course of this hopeless war. Meanwhile, high above the burning world, Admiral Lena Rowe stood at the bridge of the ESV Resolute, her face illuminated by the stars and the sea of ships in her fleet. The vastness of space stretched out before her, and yet the mission felt intensely personal. The transmission had been brief, but in those few words, a bond had been forged between Earth and the Velari. They needed them, and Earth would not let them down. Rowe turned to her tactical officer, Commander Soren Drake, who had been poring over the encrypted data from the Velari's distress signal. "They've been under siege for days. We've lost precious time. Drake looked up, his face grim. We've received a full report from Velari Prime. The Karniks are relentless, far more vicious than we thought. But the Velari are holding out in their underground cities. They just need time. Time we don't have. Ro's gaze darkened, her lips tightening. She had seen enough wars to know that even the best-trained forces could only hold on so long when they were outmatched and outgunned. The Velari were civilians, not soldiers. But humanity didn't just fight to survive. They fought to win. She turned sharply to the comms officer. Get me a live feed of the Velari surface. Now. Seconds later, the large screen in front of her flickered, showing the chaos unfolding on Velari Prime. The once beautiful green plains and towering cities were now scorched, a battlefield of burning ruins. Karniks warships hovered like vultures above, their weapons pummeling what was left of the capital. Ground forces moved through the streets, hunting down survivors. Admiral Ro's fists clenched at her sides. Prepare for orbital bombardment. We hit the Karniks hard, right where it hurts. Full firepower. Ma'am, Drake warned, his voice hesitant. The Velari's underground cities are in the line of fire. We'll get them to safety first, Ro interrupted. We don't leave our allies to die. That's not how we fight. The order was clear. Earth's fleet wasn't just here to turn the tide. They were here to finish this, to send a message. Ro could feel the weight of it. Humanity's reputation was on the line, and they would prove that Earth was not a race to be underestimated. Back on the ground, the Velari who still survived clung to their fleeting hope as they made their way to the bunkers. The ground shook as more bombs fell, but as the last remaining ships in the sky began to descend, a new sense of anticipation filled the air. Lyra had just led her final group of refugees into the shelter when a distant roar rumbled through the earth. It wasn't like the usual explosions. They were too loud, too powerful. She rushed to the entrance of the bunker, her breath caught in her throat as she saw something unimaginable. A fleet of human ships descending through the smoke-filled sky. Bright, glowing weapons illuminated the night as the human ships began their descent. And as the first salvo from their weapons crashed into the Karniks warships above, Lyra whispered to herself, they really came. The skies above Velari Prime had turned an unnatural shade of red as the human fleet continued its orbital bombardment, devastating the remaining Karniks warships. The precision and overwhelming firepower of Earth's fleet were unlike anything the Velari had ever seen. In mere moments, entire squadrons of enemy ships were reduced to smoldering wrecks, their once proud forms now floating debris. But the battle was far from over. Admiral Lena Ro had given the order for ground assault the moment the initial strike cleared the skies. It was one thing to destroy an enemy fleet. It was another to clear the planet's surface of its occupying forces. As the bombardment subsided, a fresh wave of human forces descended to the planet's surface. The Ash Wolves, Earth's elite marine battalion, were among the first to deploy. Sergeant Turek Voss and his squad were strapped into their drop pods, each pod glowing a fiery red as it plummeted toward the planet's surface, cutting through the atmosphere like a meteor storm. The heat of re-entry seared the air, but Voss felt nothing but calm. His team, hardened in countless battles, was ready. On my mark, Voss's voice came through the comms, his tone even. 5 seconds to drop. The countdown was brief. As the final number ticked down, the pod doors exploded open with a deafening blast, and the Ash Wolves leaped into the chaos below. They hit the ground with a resounding crash, the shockwave rippling outward, sending enemy soldiers scattering. The blast didn't just make an entrance, it announced Earth's fury. Move, 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 Voss barked, his pulse rifle already aimed at a nearby group of Karniks raiders. They had been caught off guard, and that was all the humans needed. The first few shots hit with deadly precision, sending Karniks' bodies flying in every direction. The enemy scrambled, but they were slow to react, stunned by the sudden, overwhelming force of the human marines. Push forward, Voss commanded. Secure the perimeter. We need to link up with Velari Command. The squad moved as one, sweeping through the battlefield with the fluidity of a well-oiled machine. They didn't wait to ask questions. They didn't hesitate. The Karniks were disorganized, caught off guard by the brutal assault. The human forces were trained for this. There was no fear, only ruthless efficiency. Captain Lyra Fennel, standing atop the remnants of a collapsed building with a small group of surviving Velari, watched the chaos unfold. She couldn't help but be mesmerized by the brutality of the humans' tactics. The Ash Wolves fought like a storm, relentless and unyielding. It was as if they had never known anything but war. They're here, one of her soldiers whispered, eyes wide. They're really here. Lyra's breath caught in her throat. She could hear the distant rumble of explosions as the humans pushed deeper into enemy territory. She had never seen such power, such aggression, in her life. Yet there was something undeniable about the raw, unfiltered ferocity of Earth's response. It was as if they were not just fighting for the Velari. They were fighting for the very principle of survival itself. Get the civilians to shelter, Lyra ordered. We need to secure the area. The Karniks may regroup. As her people moved into action, Lyra's mind raced. She had been prepared for this moment to be their last. But now, with humans in the fray, it seemed almost possible that they could win this war. Humanity's involvement had changed the entire dynamic. The Velari were not alone anymore. Back in the heart of the battle, the Ash Wolves didn't stop. They surged forward, one block at a time, pushing the Karniks back with an intensity that overwhelmed even the hardened warriors of the enemy. Voss, leading his squad through the wreckage, fired shot after shot with precision, his men flanking him. Hold the line. Keep moving. The streets of the Velari capital were littered with debris and bodies. The Karniks were fighting back, but they were no match for the humans' brutal efficiency. And with every enemy soldier that fell, another piece of hope was restored to the Velari. The ground was shaking as the battle raged. The Velari had never seen anything like it. But as their city was recaptured, Lyra couldn't help but wonder. Had humanity become more than just their saviors? Had they become something else entirely, something unstoppable? The streets of Velari Prime were alive with the sound of conflict. The air crackled with the energy of battle as human and Velari forces pushed deeper into the heart of the city. Sergeant Turig Voss and his squad of Ash Wolves moved like shadows through the rubble-strewn streets, methodically clearing out pockets of Karniks raiders who refused to surrender. Every step they took seemed to bring the end closer for the enemy. But the closer they got to the central command, the more desperate the Karniks became. Voss's eyes narrowed as he signaled for his squad to halt. The wind howled through the broken buildings, the distant rumble of artillery fire echoing in the background. They were nearing the Karniks' command center, the heart of their occupation on Velari Prime. It was here, in the core of the city, that the last remnants of the enemy leadership were holed up, preparing for a final stand. If the humans could crush this stronghold, the war on the surface would be all but over. Squad, ready up, Voss said, his voice sharp over the comms. We push through the eastern corridor and flush them out. Watch your corners. The squad checked their weapons, loading fresh rounds and tightening their armor. Their hearts raced, but none of them showed it. Every single one of them knew what was at stake, not just the survival of the Velari, but the future of Earth's presence in this galaxy. They weren't just fighting for one world. They were fighting for humanity's place among the stars. Meanwhile, Admiral Lena Rowe stood aboard the ESV Resolute, watching the progress of her fleet's ground operations from the command deck. Through the thick glass windows, she could see the flashes of light as the Marines engaged the enemy. Her fleet was tearing through the Karniks' forces with ruthless efficiency, but the Admiral's mind was elsewhere, on the Karniks themselves. Report, Commander Drake, Rowe ordered, her voice cold but calm. Where are we with the Karniks warlord? We need him alive. Drake's face appeared on the screen in front of her, his expression taut with concentration. "We've located his last stronghold, a heavily fortified compound in the heart of the city. Our teams are making their way toward it now. But there's resistance, lots of it. We're going to need more firepower to flush him out." Rose's lips curled into a tight smile. "Give it to them. Full fire support. We'll decapitate their leadership tonight." Back on the ground, Captain Lyra Fennel and her remaining forces had made their way into the heart of the city, too. The human Marines had already taken several key positions, but Velari forces were needed to hold them. The streetlights flickered, casting long shadows over the deserted avenues. The Velari had never seen combat on this scale before. They had always relied on diplomacy, peaceful negotiations, and a reliance on their advanced technology. But now, they were learning the hard truth. Sometimes, survival required more than just words. Lyra adjusted the strap on her shoulder, her eyes focused ahead. Despite the overwhelming destruction around her, there was a sense of purpose in her stride. They were winning, and the Karniks, for the first time, were on the back foot. "Captain Fennel," one of her officers called out, snapping Lyra from her thoughts. "We've got a clear path to the enemy command center. The humans are making progress." Lyra nodded sharply. "Good. Let's make sure they don't get bogged down. We push through together. We finish this." Her orders were brief, but there was no need for elaboration. The Karniks' leadership would be their last challenge. With the death of their warlord, their will to fight would crumble. And for the first time since the invasion, Lyra allowed herself to believe it. They could win this. The final push was upon them. In the heart of the enemy stronghold, the humans and Velari stood side by side, pushing toward the last pocket of resistance. Voss's squad moved quickly, methodically. Each shot they fired was a calculated step toward victory. As the squad reached the gates of the compound, Voss's voice rang out, full of confidence. "This is it. We breach the walls and take them out." Above the battlefield, the ESV Resolute prepared to deliver the final blow, locking onto the Karniks' warlord's compound. A final burst of energy rippled through the atmosphere as humanity's fury descended upon their enemies, ready to end the war with the power of a single strike. The tension in the air was palpable as the final assault on the Karniks' warlord's compound began. The towering structure loomed ahead, its jagged walls scarred by the previous bombardments. The walls, once meant to be a symbol of strength, were now a broken barrier between the humans and the last vestiges of the Karniks' resistance. Sergeant Tarek Voss led the charge, his squad tight behind him, their boots pounding against the cracked earth as they approached the compound's gates. The silence between them was thick with anticipation. Voss had fought in countless battles, but this felt different. This wasn't just about surviving or defeating an enemy. It was about finishing this war and proving that Earth had more than just the will to survive. They had the strength to conquer. "Get ready," Voss growled, his voice low but firm. "Once we breach, we don't stop. We go straight for the warlord." The squad moved quickly, their training taking over. The Ash Wolves were ruthless, their tactics brutal. They planted explosives at the compound's reinforced gates and backed away. Tarek gave a single nod. The explosion was deafening. The gates crumbled in an instant, sending a shockwave through the compound. The Karniks inside screamed in terror as the humans surged forward, their weapons raised and ready. "Push through," Voss shouted. The Ash Wolves stormed in, clearing rooms one by one with precision. The Karniks inside, despite their ferocity, were no match for the humans' brutal efficiency. Each step they took brought them closer to the warlord's inner sanctum, the heart of the Karniks' leadership. The echoes of battle reverberated throughout the compound as the humans slaughtered their way through. Meanwhile, Admiral Lena Rowe stood in the command center of the ESV Resolute, watching the live feed of the assault below. Every report that came in from the ground was promising. Her fleet had ensured complete air superiority, and the ground forces were making quick work of the enemy. "Commander Drake," she called, her voice commanding. Status on the warlord's position. Drake appeared on the holoscreen, his face tense but resolute. We've pinpointed his location, ma'am. He's holed up in a command room in the deepest part of the compound. It's a maze down there, but we have our teams closing in. If all goes well, we'll have him in custody within the hour. Rose's eyes gleamed. Make sure he's alive. We need answers, not just a body. Back on the ground, Lyra Fennel and the remaining Villari forces had joined the fray, coordinating their movements with the human Marines. The Karniks were falling back, their morale shattered with every loss. They hadn't expected humanity to be this powerful, this relentless. Lyra's heart beat fast as she fought alongside the humans. The Villari, once a peaceful race, were now learning what it took to survive. They had no choice but to adapt. She fired her own weapon, the unfamiliar weight of it strange in her hands, but she was determined to help. We're almost there, she said, her voice steady despite the chaos around her. Just a little longer, and we can end this. The hallway they were in was dimly lit, the walls scorched from earlier blasts. The air smelled of smoke and blood. As they neared the final corridor, Voss's voice came over the comms. We've reached the warlord's chamber. Prepare for final push. We're going in. The final charge was upon them. Inside the warlord's command room, the Karnik's warlord, a towering figure with spiked armor and glowing red eyes, paced furiously. He had been expecting the attack, but nothing had prepared him for the fury of the Ash Wolves and the Villari allies at his doorstep. His hands clenched into fists as he activated his personal defenses, but deep down, he knew it was only a matter of time. Ready yourself, Voss's voice crackled through the comms. We're coming for you. The door to the warlord's chamber slammed open, and the humans stormed in, guns raised. The warlord's roar of defiance echoed through the room as he grabbed a massive energy blade, charging at the first soldier he saw. But he was too slow. Voss fired first, his shots landing with pinpoint precision. The warlord's armor sparked with each hit, but it wasn't enough to stop him. With a snarl, he swung his blade at Voss, but the sergeant was ready. In an instant, he dropped to the ground, rolling out of the way. His squad closed in, their weapons lighting up the room with rapid-fire bursts. Lyra watched from the doorway, her heart pounding in her chest. The end was near. She had never imagined that her people would see such a day where the Villari stood victorious. But the humans had made it possible. The battle was almost over, and victory was now within reach. The warlord's chamber erupted into chaos. The massive figure of the Karnik's warlord swung his energy blade with all the fury of a dying beast, his glowing red eyes fixated on Sergeant Turek Voss. Each strike of the blade sent sparks flying, the air charged with the crackling energy as it tore through the atmosphere. Voss was quick, dropping low and dodging the first swing. He rolled out of range, using the momentum to regain his footing. The warlord's growl echoed off the walls, his every movement a display of raw power, but Voss had faced worse. The warlord may have been a giant, but humanity's strength lay in speed, precision, and teamwork. Covering fire, Voss barked, his voice steady. His squad opened fire, their shots landing with pinpoint accuracy. But the warlord's armor was tough, absorbing most of the hits with a dull thud. It wasn't enough to stop him, but it slowed his movements. And that was all Voss needed. The warlord roared in frustration, his blade flashing through the air in a blur of deadly arcs. But Voss anticipated the next strike. He sidestepped just in time, sending a pulse grenade flying into the warlord's chest. Boom! The blast rocked the room, knocking the warlord back. He stumbled, momentarily disoriented, and that was when Voss seized the opportunity. He sprinted forward, his combat knife drawn, and with a quick slash, he disabled the warlord's energy blade, knocking it to the ground. The warlord staggered, his red eyes wild with rage as he charged at Voss with a primal roar. But this time, Voss was prepared. With a swift motion, he ducked under the warlord's grasp and using the element of surprise, drove his knife into the warlord's exposed side. The warlord's howl of pain filled the room, but his strength was already waning. Voss twisted the knife, pushing his weight against the warlord, and with a final, brutal effort, he plunged it deep into the beast's heart. The Karnix warlord crumpled to the floor, his massive form twitching once before collapsing completely. The room fell silent, save for the heavy breaths of the humans and the crackling of the occasional fire that lit up the wreckage. For a moment, no one spoke. The weight of the battle, the months of conflict, the desperate fight for survival, it all hung in the air. Voss stood over the fallen warlord, his breath steady, but his hands still shaking slightly. He glanced up at his squad, who stood behind him, watching the last of the Karnix leadership fall. "We've done it," Voss said, his voice hoarse but resolute. "It's over." Outside the compound, Lara Fennel and her Velari forces moved swiftly, securing the surrounding area as the humans fought their way inside. The news of the warlord's defeat spread quickly, and with it came a wave of relief that washed over the battlefield like a cleansing tide. The Karnix were finished. The leadership had fallen, and with it, their will to fight. Lyra breathed deeply, taking in the sight of the fallen warlord's compound. The once stronghold of oppression now lay in ruins. It felt like a dream, almost too unreal to comprehend. This is victory," one of her officers whispered beside her. He sounded almost reverent, as if the concept of victory was foreign to them, something they had lost long ago. Lyra nodded, her eyes on the horizon. The stars that had once been a reminder of the distance between the Velari and the rest of the galaxy now felt close, within reach. Humanity's intervention had not just changed the course of this war. It had altered the course of their entire future. "We'll rebuild," Lyra said, more to herself than to her officer. "We'll rebuild, and we'll never forget this moment." Meanwhile, back aboard the ESV Resolute, Admiral Lena Rowe watched the final moments of the assault unfold. She'd seen wars end before, but this one felt different. The humans hadn't just been there to fight. They had fought to protect, to uphold something greater than victory. She turned to Commander Drake, her expression hardening with a quiet sense of triumph. "Send the word to Earth," she ordered. "We've won. The war is over." Drake nodded. "A message will be broadcast immediately, Admiral." Rowe's gaze drifted back to the feed of Velari Prime, where the battle had finally quieted. The warlord's death had shattered the last resistance, and peace, fragile and hard-won, had descended upon the planet. The Karnix were beaten, their power broken. For the first time since humanity arrived, Rowe allowed herself a rare moment of peace. The battle was over, but the war for the future had just begun. The war was over. The sound of gunfire and explosions had faded, leaving only the echoes of silence in its wake. The Karnix warlord was dead, and with his fall, the last remnants of the invaders' leadership crumbled. Velari Prime was no longer under occupation. The war-torn city was slowly beginning to breathe again, as its people ventured from their hiding places, eyes wide with disbelief and hope. Sergeant Turig Voss stood among the ruins of the warlord's compound, his hand resting on the cold, bloodied surface of his weapon. The adrenaline was beginning to wear off, and in its place was a quiet sense of exhaustion. He had led his squad through countless battles, but nothing had felt as weighty as this moment. The finality of it, the fact that they had turned the tide, not just for the Velari, but for Earth's place in the galaxy. Around him, the Ash Wolves were already securing the perimeter, checking for any last pockets of resistance. They had done their job, and they had done it well. Voss felt the weight of that accomplishment settle on him like an old, familiar mantle. "Good work, Sergeant," said Captain Lila Owens, his second in command, as she approached, her face smeared with grime and sweat. "We've done it. The Velari are free." Voss nodded, but his gaze lingered on the broken walls of the compound. "We've done our part," he said quietly. "But this is just the beginning. The Velari now have a chance. What happens next is up to them. Meanwhile, Lyra Fennel stood near the edge of the compound, watching the humans as they began to regroup. She had fought alongside them, felt the bond of shared purpose, and now, for the first time in her life, she felt something that had been long absent from the Velari people: hope. It wasn't just the fact that they had won. It wasn't even the fact that their world was free. It was something deeper. The Velari had been lost, adrift in the vastness of space, searching for meaning beyond their own borders. They had once believed that their path was one of peace, that diplomacy and technology alone would sustain them. But the Karniks had shattered that illusion. The war had forced them to confront the reality that survival in this harsh universe required something more. And now, with humanity's intervention, the Velari were given the chance to rebuild, not just their world, but their place in the stars. Lyra glanced at the ash wolves, noting the way they worked, efficient, yet with a humanity that shone through despite the brutality of war. There was a raw, undeniable strength in them, but it was tempered with something the Velari had lost sight of: empathy. We must learn from them, she whispered to herself, eyes softening as she watched Voss and his squad continue their work. Back aboard the ESV Resolute, Admiral Lena Rose stood at the observation deck, watching the blue-green orb of Velari Prime spin slowly in the distance. The fleet was preparing to leave orbit, but Rose's thoughts were already drifting back to Earth. The war had been costly, lives had been lost, and humanity had bled in this struggle. But the rewards were undeniable. Earth had proven that it was a force to be reckoned with, not just in military power, but in conviction, in unity, in strength. Drake entered the room, his expression grim but resolute. "Admiral, we've received a message from Earth." Rose turned to face him, her gaze steady. "Play it." The holo-projector flickered to life, and the familiar face of President Claire Vasquez appeared before her. The message was brief but heavy with meaning. "Admiral Rose," the president's voice resonated through the room, "your efforts in the Velari campaign have ensured the survival of a people who will forever owe their freedom to Earth. But this victory comes with responsibility. We are no longer just the protectors of our world. We are stewards of the galaxy." Rose's eyes narrowed. "What does that mean, Madam President?" President Vasquez's expression softened. "It means we must be more than just soldiers. We must become leaders. We've shown the galaxy what we are capable of, but the future we fight for can't just be one of war. It must be one of alliances, of cooperation. The Karniks were just the beginning. Other threats will rise." The message ended abruptly, leaving Rose in silence. The future, it seemed, was now a shared responsibility between the Velari and humanity. As the ESV Resolute prepared to depart Velari Prime's orbit, the winds of change were already sweeping across the surface. The Velari, once fragile and isolated, had found new allies in the humans, and for the first time in a long while, the stars no longer felt distant. The future of humanity and the Velari would intertwine, as equals, as partners, forging a new destiny in the vast, unpredictable universe. For Tariq Voss, Lyra Fennel, and the countless others who had fought and sacrificed, it was a new dawn. The war was over, but the journey had just begun.